is Coaching Club TV. This is part 2 of emotional intelligence. Why it is, what it is, and how we as executive coaches help our clients use it to improve their personal and professional lives. In part 1, we spoke about what an emotion is, where it comes from, and how it's generated in the brain and expressed in the body. Now, I just want to remind you that when we talk about emotional intelligence, we're not only talking about this kind of emotion, the negative emotions, fear, panic, stress, anger. These are very popular. When we think about emotional intelligence, we tend to think that it's all about managing these emotions. That's not true. There's so much more to it. And in this video, we will look at part 1 of the 5 domains of emotional intelligence as popularized by Daniel Goleman. And those 5 domains are self-awareness, self-management, self-motivation, empathy, and social skill. Self-awareness perhaps being the most important of the 5 domains. It's not only being aware of when you are experiencing a strong negative emotion in perhaps a time and place that isn't appropriate, but it's also about when you are experiencing those other emotions, things that aren't necessarily so visible to other people. When you're experiencing fear, when you're experiencing irritation, sadness, even feeling not good enough. All right, all these emotions, these feelings affect how we interact with other people. Do you remember these? This is an old transistor radio where you actually had to tune in manually to find the frequency that you wanted to listen to. And the frequency that we want to listen to when it comes to improving our emotional intelligence is our emotional language. What emotions do we use? When do we use them? And what provokes them in ourselves? So this is about getting very, very clear and tuning that frequency, like we did when we visited our grandmother way back when, to actually hear the station that we want to hear. How do we do this? Well, at the end of every day, we need to sit down. We don't have to journal it, but if you want to journal and write, that's great. But actually sit down and think, maybe on the way home, on the train, in the car, all right, where did I respond in a way that I didn't think was the best way to respond? Where did I perhaps get angry with someone? Where did I respond too quickly without thinking? Where did I perhaps not respond? Where was I feeling shy? Where did I feel that my comment wasn't worth making? All right, so there's the negative emotions, the stress emotions, and all sorts of other emotions that come into our emotional language. If we do this enough over a series of a few days, a few weeks, we will start to see a pattern in how we responded. Right? And that pattern becomes very, very important because that pattern will eventually show us what our emotional red flags are. Where do we respond in a way that we don't feel is appropriate for the situation, in a way that we didn't want to respond, but we did anyway? We responded emotionally, not perhaps with our prefrontal cortex. Right? Remember, the part of the brain that thinks and makes decisions and processes information, but a very, very slow part of the brain. I'll tell you my red flag that I discovered when I was very young. I was 21. I was heading up a marketing department for a big asset management company. And I would walk in a room and immediately the people around the boardroom table would think I was the secretary, receptionist, tea girl, you name it. I was there to take notes and make tea and not to actually chair the meeting. And initially this would generate a huge emotional response in me. My palms would get sweaty. I could feel the hair on the back of my neck stand up. Being very pale, I actually knew I was going red. And it took me a few years, actually, as I matured, to realize that this not feeling good enough, being judged, was one of my red flags. And it led to me perhaps not making the best possible decisions and responding to people in a suboptimal way. But when I realized this, I could actually deal with it. I actually could counter this physical emotional response that I was feeling. I understood that it was one of my red flags. What are your red flags? Is it somebody judging you? Is it somebody questioning you? Is it somebody not being polite, kind, or courteous? What is it? Is it somebody not trusting you? Think about it, because when you know what your emotional red flags are, then we can move on to part 2, which is emotional management, self-management. And this is where the fun starts, because this is where we start looking at that gap, that input-output gap, and what happens in that gap to improve our emotional intelligence. And remember, if you need a coach, an executive coach, anywhere in the world to help you develop your emotional language a little quicker than doing it yourself, give us a call at the Coaching Club. We're a bunch of friendly, well-qualified coaches.